Hello everyone, my name is Julie and I recently did a video about beginner basics of edge-to-edge quilting. Now when I did that video, the design that I happened to choose just came in perfectly. Everything about it worked perfectly. I had no extra space at the top of my quilt. I had no gaps when I repeated the design. And if you're like me, whenever you do anything by yourself, it never works out perfectly. So what do you do then? This is the reason I made this video today. I am going to show you what to do when you bring in a great design, but it doesn't fit just perfectly. What do you do to make it perfect for your quilt? I hope you enjoy this video. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Let's begin on the computer on Pro Stitcher Premium. I have Ocean Wave by My Creative Stitches open and I have the grid selected. Over on the left you'll see in green is where the grid is. Each one of the large squares represents an inch and the small square represents a quarter. See that circle that I'm showing you there with my cursor, right? The third one over from the left in the first design, the bottom left. There you go. Okay, I placed it right on that square so I could show you that that's like a whole inch between that one stitch and the next stitch, a whole inch. And so I know that this design is too loose for my liking. So first thing I'm going to do is go in and put my area, and it's 64-inch wide quilt, and you know I like to have the height of my area 30-35 inches. Now looking at the grid this way, it can just look really messy to the eyes. I don't like to look at the grid all the time, but I really do see the value of using it for size. Now I can see that right here I've got like what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches on that first edge there, 5.5 even before stitching would start. I don't want 5 inches of no stitching on my quilt. So you can see this is an awesome design. It's going to nest wonderfully, but I'm going to have to move it up because I want stitching from the very start on the quilt. So what I'm going to have to do is move the design for the first row way above where my quilt starts. So I'm looking at the size of this design, the width and the height. The height's not bad, but overall for my throat space and everything, but you know I looked and saw that it just was looser than I wanted. So I'm going to modify and resize, lock the aspect ratio. Sometimes I don't have to lock the aspect ratio if it doesn't matter on the design. If I didn't lock it on this though, it would get real distorted. So I'm locking that, and I'm getting this smaller, and I'm just kind of taking it down bit by bit, watching my numbers and also kind of watching that grid. Next I select modify and align. Now I don't really want it at the top vertically, I'm just looking at horizontally, so I choose left. Will I leave it there? Probably not, but I just wanted to see right where the left was. Now I'm going to reposition, and do you see over at the bottom right on the nudge? I'm going to hold this arrow down to move this over because I still have a lot of space up at the top left where there wouldn't be any quilting. And sometimes just holding it down for some time, it will move faster, but then sometimes you let go of it, it keeps moving, so you just have to play around with it. I'm going to take the grid off so that we can see a little better on the screen and it doesn't bother our eyes so much. So I'm going to go to repeat. That's still not exactly where I want to position that, but let's repeat here. Go to horizontal. Now I didn't see the point to point come up, so I'm just going to select it just to make sure. And so let's see about how many I think that I'm going to need in here. So that wasn't enough. So there we go, 7. That pretty much fills it up. I might need a little more. I don't know. I'm kind of figuring it out. I'm just playing with the controls, okay? Now I'm going to baseline that. Because if I don't baseline it, I can get some little pauses in there, little green dots, okay? So now I could use reposition, but I'm just grabbing it and moving it. There are a number of ways to do any one thing in Pro Stitcher. It's just kind of what you want to do at the time. Do you want to just grab it and move it? Do you want to go to one of the controls and select something and move it? So now I've got some repeats in, and I'm moving it up above my area box, and that will be the top of my quilt. Now I'm going to go to vertical. Oh, see, this time I have a big gap in between these. Now I could make a whole bunch of repeats and then try to fix my gap. I'll show you what I mean. But see, they all come in with gaps. So the way I like to do it is to just take those off, and I fix my gap between the first two before I repeat anymore. So I'm going down to gap, and I can make it bigger. Just to show you here, I wouldn't want to make it bigger, but I can. Sometimes you need a little more space. Or I can use the negative and close up that gap. And then when it gets closer, you kind of finesse it, because you don't want to see a gap, but you don't want to get it so close that it's not really working with that design. Now I see, look, I've created some space that I didn't know I was going to have. That means I'll shift it a little bit again. Now I'm ready to get my vertical additional rows in. Get in as many as you want. I'd like to have 1 row for repositioning, 1 row for stitching, another row or 2 for cropping. So now I've got them, all of my rows, and they're looking pretty good on the quilt. There's a little bit of space on the sides. Could maybe fill that out just a little bit more. But you know what? When I get over to the quilt and the long arm, I'm not real sure how that space is going to align out with what I've done here. So I'm going to have to tweak it again there. So I'm going to go to Modify, Crop, close the edges, and crop the outside. I'll need to baseline that. Click on Baseline. Now, do you see how the top of that is cropped? The big thing you got to be careful about is not to stitch that over and over. You don't want lines all over your quilt. So when I save this, now I've gone to File and Save, and I'm looking for my flash drive. I like to save with some name, that some way I'm going to know that this one has a cropped edge. I might put cropped first row or something like that. And then after I've done my first row or first and second row, then I'm going to move my start down to the second row and do a crop at start and stop and resave that. And that will be what I use from then on, because I don't want to accidentally, and I've done it more than once, I don't want to accidentally stitch my first row somewhere down on the quilt and have lines going across the quilt and not see it, not stop it soon enough. I want you to see the quilt that I'm going to be stitching this on. A customer of mine named Corrine pieced this. It is a Bonnie Hunter mystery quilt. I believe it's called Chilhowie. I am possibly mispronouncing that. I think it's just gorgeous. I love it. I want to do one now too. I'm showing you here that one thing I like to do is to put my channel locks on and on horizontal and make a line across the batting, and then put my quilt top up on that line, make sure everything's on the line. Then I put pins in sometimes if it's just to hold it in place so that I can then baste my quilt on the tops and the sides. Here I've completed stitching the first row, which is rather short because we cropped that first row. You can see up here though how nicely that's going to look when the binding is put on. There's not going to be any big gap with no quilting done on it. So it looks really good. And by the way, I used glide thread and the color is Sprout. It's a really good color for a lot of quilts. I'm over at the end. I'm going to have to do needle down and up and then clip my threads because I've got my long jump pause, which tells us to trim our thread and press resume to continue. With this first row being very short, I have plenty of room on my throat space to just go ahead and resume that second row without having to advance the quilt. So I'm going to do just that. I have pushed resume and I have both of my threads in my hands, and then I'm going to push resume again, and then this is just going to start stitching out and stitch my second row on this quilt. By the way, I bet you heard my kitty cat a few times on this recording, and that won't be the last time either. I want to take a moment out just to show you my settings. Just to note that I am on regulated stitching on cruise whenever I do edge to edge. You can also see here I like to have a timer on my bobbin, and it's getting down pretty low, so I'm going to change it before I start the next row. At this point, I have stitched the second row, and I want to show you where my screen is. I have another long jump pause. This is after the second row. The cropped row is number 1, and then the second row is a full row. This is the end of my second row on the quilt. So I'm going to pull the machine back just to get some thread, and then I reach over to the left handlebar and do a needle down, needle up to put the needle down and up and then grab that thread, and then I can cut my threads. Now I'll take my side clasps off of my quilt so that I can advance the quilt. These are kind of DIY clasps. Now I walk over to the side and I release my ratchets, and then I can roll the quilt. There we go. Advance the quilt. If I advance it too much and my machine won't go up without hitting a pole, then I'll loosen it and pull it back down and get it positioned just right first. But now I think I have it where I want it. I always check my batting, make sure that's good, give a little tug underneath. And then I'm going to move my long arm over to the left side of my quilt because that's where I'll start my next row. And I'm going to get ready and do drag and drop. Before I do my drag and drop, I want to get rid of that first cropped row so I don't accidentally stitch it someplace it doesn't belong. So I'm going to go up to Pro Stitcher and New Start and End. I'm going to jump my starting point down to the next row, and then I want to go to Modify and Crop, and I want to crop it between the start and end, and in that way I've got rid of that first cropped row. Next, I want to save that. In order to drag the computer design to sit on top of the quilting design, I will need to sit the first row on top of the last design that I stitched. So I moved the starting point down one more. Then I'm going to pick a place, and I choose this third spot where these designs connect. And I'm going to try to find my crosshairs. And the thing is, sometimes it's hard to find crosshairs. And that's why I'm going to just let this video play out instead of editing it and just trying to make it look all perfect for you. Because I move the long arm all around and sometimes can't find the crosshairs. So I might have to do something a little different. So I'm going to start over, and maybe I zoomed in too much. So I'm going to zoom in, but just not quite as much as I did before. Now that I've found the crosshairs, maybe I can get them to show up again on the computer. As you can see, oh, I had to move it way down on my quilt. So just keep moving your machine around if this happens to you. So I had to move the long arm machine farther down on my quilt to get the crosshairs to where I needed them, because I need my crosshairs to go on the position that I'm going to choose. And then I'm going to select drag, which is right above the area. Drag. Now I want to look at my quilt. I want to find that exact same spot that has already been quilted, and then I will drop that computer design right on top of it. So I'm counting over 1, 2, 3. That's the spot where I want to drop that design onto my quilt. So anywhere after I drop it, after I choose drop, anywhere on this stitching, I can move my needle, and wherever it moves, I should be able to look up on the computer and see my crosshairs at that position. I double check myself by putting the machine up where the top stitching line will be, just to make sure it looks good to me and I'm ready to stitch the next row. Before I sign off, I would like to add some big tips. I suggest that on the flash drive you take to your long arm, that you save one of the original design. Not the whole pantograph or the whole design you put together, but just that one. Then also, once you've resized it, save one and call it resized. If the design is called Swirly Star, I put Swirly Star resized. Then before you crop your full edge to edge, I save that like the name and master, like Swirly Star Master. The reason I do this is because sometimes you get over to your quilt and the quilt is not the exact size that you did on your computer, and so instead of using the one that's already cropped, it's nice to have a master to pull from. Once you crop it to your area size, then save it as name cropped, or if you had to crop that first row, I save it as name crop row 1. Then, just like I did in the video, later, once you've already stitched that out and remove row 1, save it again with a new name. I didn't want to go through all of this within the video because I thought it's a lot to handle. But after you've seen all of the steps, I think now, for those of you who are interested, now's a good time to offer these tips. I learned them the hard way, so it's just a suggestion, but I hope it helps you out. Thank you so very much for watching. I'll see you next time on my next video.